Elena Morales stood behind the wooden bar counter, wiping down the surface with slow, careful strokes. The rag moved in small circles, picking up every drop of spilled beer and sticky soda. She had done this same motion hundreds of times before, maybe thousands. Her hands knew the routine without thinking. Outside the window, the sun was setting over the highway, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Trucks rolled past on the dusty road, their engines rumbling like distant thunder. It was Thursday evening at Murphy's Roadhouse, a small bar that sat at the edge of town where the desert met civilization. The place was nothing fancy, just wooden tables, mismatched chairs, and a jukebox in the corner that played old country songs. A few neon beer signs hung on the walls, casting colorful shadows across the worn floor. The air smelled like French fries, coffee, and the faint trace of cigarette smoke that had soaked into the walls over many years. Elena had worked here for 6 months now, arriving every afternoon at 4 o'clock and leaving after midnight. She wore simple clothes, faded jeans, and a plain white shirt. Nothing that drew attention. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail. Neat and practical, she kept her head down. Did her work and went home. That was how she liked it. Quiet, simple, invisible. The regular customers were scattered around the room tonight. At table 3 sat Frank and Bobby, 2 construction workers still wearing their dusty work boots. They laughed over their beers, arguing about which football team would win this weekend. Near the window, an older couple shared a basket of onion rings. Speaking in low voices, 3 long-haul truckers occupied the counter, eating burgers and checking their phones. In the corner booth, Sheriff Tom Bradley sat alone with a cup of black coffee, still wearing his uniform, even though his shift had ended an hour ago. "Elena, can I get another Coke?" called Jake Miller, the young bartender who worked beside her. He was only 25, still figuring out life. Always asking questions and trying too hard to make friends with everyone. "Coming right up," Elena replied, her voice soft and even. She filled a glass with ice and soda, placed it on a small tray, and carried it to table 7. Her movements were smooth and balanced. Like a dancer who had practiced the same steps 1,000 times, she never rushed, never stumbled. Every action had purpose. As she walked back to the bar, she glanced at the clock on the wall, 8:15. The evening crowd would start arriving soon, more workers finishing their shifts. Maybe a few travelers looking for food before continuing down the highway. Murphy's was the kind of place where people stopped but didn't stay long. A pit stop between here and there, Elena picked up another glass and began polishing it, watching the room through the mirror behind the bar. This was her habit, always watching, always aware. She noticed when someone walked to the bathroom, when a customer waved for service, when the front door opened or closed. Details mattered, patterns mattered. She had learned that lesson long ago in a place far from here. "You're good at this," Jake said, wiping his hands on a towel. "You never seem stressed. No matter how busy it gets," Elena shrugged. "Practice," she said simply. What Jake didn't know, what nobody here knew, was that Elena had spent years practicing much harder things than carrying drinks and remembering orders. She had practiced staying calm when bullets flew overhead, when explosions shook the ground, when every decision meant life or death. But that was the old life, the life she had left behind. Here, she was just Elena the waitress, nothing more. Outside, the sky had turned darker. The first stars appeared, faint against the purple evening. Traffic on the highway thinned out, and the desert beyond seemed to stretch forever into shadows. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. Then Elena heard it, a sound that made her shoulders tighten without her meaning to. The deep rumble of motorcycle engines, not just 1 or 2, but several. The sound grew louder, coming closer. She set down the glass she was holding and looked toward the window. Through the dusty glass, she could see headlights approaching. 7 motorcycles rolled into the parking lot, their chrome parts catching the last light of day. The bikes circled once like wolves sizing up prey, then parked in a row near the entrance. The engines cut off one by one, leaving a heavy silence. 7 men climbed off their motorcycles. Their leather jackets caught Elena's attention immediately. Each jacket bore the same symbol on the back, a skull with a snake wrapped around it. Below the skull, words were stitched in red thread, "Desert Vipers." Elena's jaw tightened. She had heard stories about this gang. Stories about bars that refused to pay protection money and mysteriously burned down a week later. Stories about owners who argued and ended up in the hospital. The Desert Vipers didn't ask for things. They took. Sheriff Tom noticed them too. He set down his coffee cup slowly, his hand moving near his belt where his phone sat. His face remained calm, but his eyes were alert. Watching, the front door opened and the bikers walked in. Their boots were heavy on the wooden floor. The leader entered first. A tall man with a shaved head and a thick neck, a snake tattoo coiled up from his collar, seeming to wrap around his throat. His eyes swept the room like a predator checking for threats. The bar fell silent. The construction workers stopped talking. The old couple looked down at their food. Even the jukebox seemed to quiet down. Though the same song still played, Elena stood behind the bar, her hands resting on the counter. Her face showed nothing, no fear, no anger, just the same calm expression she always wore, but inside, old instincts were waking up, instincts she had tried to bury. She counted them, 7 men. She noted their positions, who stood near the door, who moved toward the pool table, who watched the exits. She measured distances, calculated angles. All of this happened in seconds. Automatic as breathing, the leader smiled. But it wasn't a friendly smile. "Good evening, folks," he said loudly, his voice filling the room. "We're here for a drink and a little conversation." His eyes found Elena, and his smile grew wider. The calm was over. The storm had arrived. The 7 bikers spread through Murphy's Roadhouse like ink bleeding into water, slow and deliberate, claiming every corner. The leader walked to the center of the room, his boots clicking against the wooden floor with each step. He moved like a man who owned the place. Though he had never paid a single dollar for anything here, his leather jacket creaked as he turned, surveying the silent crowd with cold, calculating eyes. "My name is Vince Jackson," he announced, his voice carrying across the room like a preacher addressing his flock. "But folks around here call me Viper." He tapped the snake tattoo on his neck, the ink seeming to pulse under the dim yellow lights. "You know why they call me that? Because once I sink my teeth in, I don't let go." Elena stood motionless behind the bar, her hands resting flat on the counter. She watched him the way a chess player watches an opponent's opening move. Reading intention in every gesture, Viper wasn't just making an entrance. He was establishing dominance, marking territory. She had seen this behavior before in different uniforms. Different accents, but always the same underlying threat. The other 6 bikers positioned themselves with military precision. One leaned against the jukebox, his thick arms crossed over his chest. Cutting off that corner of the room, 2 more drifted toward the pool table, their eyes scanning the customers rather than the game. Another stood near the back door, blocking the emergency exit. The remaining 2 flanked the main entrance, trapping everyone inside like fish in a net. Jake whispered beside Elena, his voice tight with fear. "Those are the guys who burned down Rosette's bar in Oceanside last month." His hands trembled as he wiped the same glass over and over. "The owner refused to pay, and the whole place went up in flames, I know," Elena replied quietly, her voice steady as a heartbeat. She had already researched the Desert Vipers the moment she heard their motorcycles. Old habits died hard. Know your enemy, assess the threat, plan 3 exits. These lessons were burned into her memory deeper than any tattoo. Viper pulled out a chair at the center table and sat down heavily. Spreading his legs wide, taking up space, his crew remained standing, sentinels watching for any sign of resistance. The construction workers at Table 3 suddenly found their beers very interesting, staring down at the amber liquid as if it held the secrets of the universe. The old couple near the window gathered their belongings quietly. "Preparing to leave? Nobody moves," Viper said, his tone casual but the command unmistakable. The old woman's purse dropped back onto the table with a soft thud. "You'll leave when I say you can leave," he smiled again, that same predator's grin that showed too many teeth. "Right now, we're all going to have a nice, friendly conversation about business." Sheriff Tom Bradley shifted in his corner booth. His hand moved slowly toward his phone, but Viper's eyes caught the movement immediately. "Sheriff!" Viper called out, his voice dripping with false respect. "Good to see you here off duty, I assume." He gestured around the room. "No badge visible, no gun on your hip, just a tired old man drinking coffee." He leaned forward. "That means you got no authority tonight, understand? You're just another customer." The sheriff's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. His hand remained near his phone, hovering like a bird deciding whether to land. Elena set 7 beer bottles on a worn wooden tray. Arranging them in a precise circle, each bottle was cold to the touch, condensation already forming tiny droplets on the glass. She picked up the tray with both hands, balancing it perfectly at shoulder height, and walked back toward Viper's table. Her footsteps made no sound. She had learned long ago how to move quietly. how to become part of the background when necessary. As she approached the table, one of the bikers, a heavy-set man with a gray beard and scarred knuckles, stuck his boot out suddenly. His foot blocked her path, forcing her to stop short. The beers wobbled on the tray but didn't fall. Elena's hands adjusted automatically, compensating for the shift in weight. "Watch where you're going." "Honey!" the bearded biker sneered. His friends laughed, enjoying the game. Elena stepped around his boot without comment. She placed each beer on the table carefully. One at a time, her movements were methodical, giving nothing away, no anger, no fear. Just a waitress doing her job, but as she set down the fourth bottle, a hand shot out and slapped her hip hard. The impact stung. The touch was violation disguised as play. "Now that's more like it," the biker who touched her said. His name patch read Crusher, and his grin revealed a gold tooth. "You got a nice walk, girl. Do it again. Put some swing in it this time." The words felt like insects crawling on her skin. Elena's jaw tightened for just a fraction of a second before she forced it to relax. She finished placing the remaining beers and straightened up. Her eyes swept the room in a practiced pattern. Cataloging everything, Sheriff Tom had his phone out now. Partially hidden under the table, his thumb moved across the screen. Likely texting for backup, but backup would take time. The nearest state police barracks was 20 minutes away. 20 minutes was a lifetime when violence was seconds away from breaking loose. Jake stood frozen behind the bar, gripping a baseball bat he kept hidden beneath the counter. His knuckles were white, his face was flushed with anger and helplessness. He was young, well-meaning, but completely unprepared for what was unfolding. At table 3, Frank and Bobby, the construction workers, sat rigid in their seats. Their eyes darted between Elena and the exit, calculating whether they could make it to the door, whether they should intervene, whether silence was safer than action. The old couple near the window had gone completely still, as if moving might attract attention, like prey animals hoping the predator would pass them by. Viper took a long drink from his beer, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "You know what I respect?" he said, directing his words at Elena but speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. "Hard work, dedication," he gestured at her with the bottle. "You show up, you do your job, you don't complain. That's admirable." He paused, letting the false praise hang in the air. "But respect only goes so far," he continued, his tone shifting. "At the end of the day, there's a natural order to things. Some people give orders, some people take them, some people own, some people serve." His eyes locked onto Elena's. "Understanding your place, that's wisdom. Understanding your place." The words landed like stones, each one weighted with history, with assumptions about who she was, what she was worth, where she belonged. Elena's face remained neutral, but inside her mind was working rapidly. She counted the bikers again. 7 total, 2 by the doors, 1 at the jukebox, 1 at the pool table, 3 at the center table with Viper. She noted their builds, their postures, which ones carried weapons openly, which ones had suspicious bulges under their jackets. The biker at the jukebox, a thin man with a spiderweb tattoo covering half his face, called out, "Hey waitress, where are you really from?" It was a question Elena had heard countless times, always phrased the same way, always with that word really, as if her answer couldn't possibly be something simple like Texas or California, as if there had to be some other explanation for her existence in this space. "I'm from here," Elena answered simply. "Nah, I mean originally," Spiderweb pressed. "You know what I'm asking." "I was born in San Diego," Elena said, her voice still even, still professional. "But where are your people from?" He insisted, refusing to let it go. This was the game. Push, prod, diminish. Force her to explain herself, to justify her presence, to become smaller and smaller until she disappeared entirely. Before Elena could respond, Viper interrupted. "Leave her alone," he said. But there was no kindness in his intervention. "She's being cooperative. That deserves some courtesy." He turned back to Elena. "You got a phone number for Murphy?" "I can try his cell," Elena replied. "Do it now," Viper ordered. "Put it on speaker. I want to hear him agree to our terms." Elena pulled out her phone from her apron pocket. Her fingers moved across the screen. She held the phone to her ear. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then Murphy's voicemail picked up, his recorded voice cheerful and oblivious. "He's not answering," Elena said, showing Viper the screen as proof. Viper's expression darkened. His patience, already thin, was evaporating like water on hot pavement. "Try again," he demanded. Elena dialed a second time. Same result, voicemail. Well, That's unfortunate, Viper said slowly. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound. Seems like we have a communication problem. He walked around the table, circling Elena like a shark. You know what happens when people don't communicate? He asked. Misunderstandings occur, accidents happen. He stopped directly behind her, close enough that she could feel his breath on her neck. Maybe Murphy needs motivation, he said quietly. Maybe something needs to happen tonight to help him understand we're serious. Elena's muscles tensed involuntarily. Every instinct screamed at her to move, to create distance, to neutralize the threat, but she held still, controlled her breathing, waited. Hey, Viper, Crusher called out. Check out her hair. Is that real or one of them weaves? Another biker chimed in. Bet it's fake. They all wear fake hair, right? The conversation was spiraling, each comment more degrading than the last. The bikers were working themselves up, feeding off each other's energy. This was how violence began. Not with explosions, but with small cruelties that built momentum. Viper reached out and grabbed Elena's ponytail. Yanking it roughly, Elena's head snapped back. Pain shooting through her scalp. Feels real to me, Viper announced, still holding her hair. What do you think, boys? Should we check if the rest of her is real too? The laughter that followed was ugly, threatening. It filled the room like smoke. Sheriff Tom started to stand, his face red with anger. That's enough, he said, his voice carrying the authority of 30 years in law enforcement. Viper released Elena's hair and turned toward the sheriff. Sit down, old man, he said coldly. You're outnumbered 7-1. You're off duty. You got no jurisdiction here. All you got is a cell phone and bad knees. He took a step toward Tom. You really want to be a hero tonight? You really want to find out how that ends? The sheriff remained standing, but he didn't move forward. The math was simple and brutal. 1 man against 7. Even with training, even with experience, the odds were impossible. Elena used the momentary distraction to step away, creating space between herself and Viper. She moved toward the bar, her mind racing through scenarios. Options were limited. The bikers controlled the exits. They had numbers. They had weapons. They had no fear of consequences. But they didn't know who she was, what she had survived, what she was capable of when pushed too far. Not yet. Viper turned his attention back to Elena. All right, sweetheart, since Murphy won't answer his phone, here's what's going to happen, he said, his voice taking on a businesslike tone. You're going to write down a message for him. You're going to explain that the Desert Vipers stopped by, that we made a very reasonable offer, and that he has 48 hours to decide. He pulled out a lighter, flicking it open and closed, the small flame dancing. You're also going to mention that we'd hate to see this place burn. Such a shame when old buildings catch fire, dry wood, faulty wiring. So many things can go wrong. The threat was explicit now. No more pretense, no more polite euphemisms. Elena's hand brushed against her lower back, an unconscious gesture, touching the place where a holster used to rest, where a sidearm once sat ready. But there was no weapon there now, just memory. I'll write the message, Elena said quietly. Good, Viper smiled, thinking he had won, thinking she had broken. But Elena wasn't broken, she was calculating. Elena walked slowly back to the bar, each step measured and deliberate. Her mind was working through possibilities like a computer running calculations. She reached under the counter and pulled out a small notepad and pen, the same ones used for taking food orders. Her hand was steady as she prepared to write. Behind her, the Desert Vipers had grown more comfortable, more bold. They drank their beers and talked loudly among themselves, making crude jokes and laughing at their own cleverness. They believed they had already won, believed this was just another easy score, another frightened business owner who would pay to avoid trouble. Viper leaned back in his chair, boots propped up on another seat, acting like he owned the place. Make sure you write it clearly, he called out to Elena. Murphy needs to understand exactly what's at stake. $5,000 a month keeps his bar standing. Refusal means ashes and insurance claims. Elena began writing, her handwriting neat and precise. But she wasn't writing what Viper thought she was writing. She was documenting everything. Names from jacket patches, physical descriptions, exact quotes of their threats. Times and details, evidence. Jake moved closer to her, pretending to arrange bottles. What are we going to do? He whispered urgently. His fear was palpable, vibrating off him like heat. Stay calm, Elena whispered back. Keep your phone recording if you can. Make sure it captures audio. Jake's eyes widened slightly. Then he nodded, He pulled out his phone carefully, setting it on the back counter with the camera facing the room. His hand shook as he positioned it between two liquor bottles where it wouldn't be noticed. Across the room, Maria Santos, a regular customer who owned the flower shop downtown, sat frozen at her table. Her coffee had gone cold 20 minutes ago. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, with gray streaking through her dark hair. Her eyes met Elena's briefly, and in that moment, something passed between them. Recognition, solidarity. The silent understanding that comes from being underestimated your entire life. Viper drained his beer and slammed the bottle down on the table with a sharp crack. "Another round," he ordered, snapping his fingers at Elena like she was a dog. Elena set down the notepad and picked up the tray again. She moved to the cooler, pulling out 7 more bottles. The glass was icy against her palms, grounding her, keeping her focused. She'd been in tighter situations than this, faced worse odds, survived things that would have broken most people. As she approached the table with the fresh beers, Crusher reached out again, but this time he grabbed her wrist. His grip was iron, his fingers dug into her skin. "You know what I think?" he said, pulling her closer. "I think you're being too quiet, too obedient. Makes me wonder what you're really thinking behind those eyes." Elena looked directly at him, her expression blank. "I'm thinking about doing my job," she said simply. "Nah," Crusher shook his head. "I think you're judging us. Looking down on us," he squeezed harder. "You think you're better than us because you follow rules, because you're polite and proper?" His voice rose. "We're the ones with power here. We're the ones who decide what happens." "Let go of my arm," Elena said, her voice still calm but with an edge now. "Like a blade sliding from its sheath, or what?" Crusher challenged. "What are you going to do about it?" The room held its breath. Even the other bikers stopped talking, sensing that something was shifting, that an invisible line was being approached. Sheriff Tom stood up fully now, his phone in his hand. "Release her," he said, his voice carrying decades of command. "Right now," Viper laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Sheriff, we've been through this. You're off duty. You have no authority, and honestly, you're starting to annoy me." He gestured to 2 of his men. "Spider, Hammer, why don't you help the sheriff understand that he should sit down and shut up?" The 2 bikers moved toward Tom. Flanking him on both sides, Spider cracked his knuckles. Hammer pulled out a knife, letting the blade catch the light. Just enough to be seen, to be understood. Tom's jaw clenched, but he was a realist. He had been in law enforcement long enough to know when he was outmatched. Fighting would only get him hurt, maybe killed, and then no one could call for help. Sometimes retreat was the smartest option. "This isn't over," Tom said quietly. But he sat back down. "Yes, it is," Viper replied coldly. Crusher still held Elena's wrist, enjoying his power over her. "Now where were we?" he said, grinning. "Oh yeah, you were about to serve us with a smile." Elena set the tray down on the edge of the table with her free hand. Her movements were precise, controlled. She began placing the beers one by one, ignoring the pain in her wrist where Crusher's fingers continued to dig in. Viper stood up and walked over, his shadow falling across Elena. "You know what I don't like?" he said conversationally. "Disrespect, when I come into an establishment and the staff doesn't show proper appreciation." He circled around her slowly. "We're customers. We deserve good service." "You haven't paid for anything yet," Elena said quietly. The words came out before she could stop them. The room went dead silent. Viper's face changed. The false friendliness evaporated instantly. His eyes went cold and hard, like stones at the bottom of a frozen lake. "What did you just say?" Elena could have backed down, could have apologized, could have played the submissive role they expected, but something inside her refused. Some part of her that had been locked away for 6 months. The part that had never learned how to kneel. "I said you haven't paid," Elena repeated, meeting his eyes. "Customers pay for their drinks." Viper's hand moved fast, grabbing the front of Elena's shirt, his knuckles pressed against her collarbone. Crusher released her wrist, sensing that his boss needed room. "You think you're clever?" Viper hissed, his face inches from hers. "You think talking back makes you brave?" Around the room, customers pressed themselves against walls. Trying to become invisible, the construction workers looked away. The old couple held hands tightly, their faces pale. Maria Santos gripped her coffee cup with both hands, her lips moving in what might have been prayer. "You need to learn your place," Viper said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt louder than shouting. "Need to learn what happens when people like you forget who they're dealing with." People like you. Again, always. The casual racism that reduced her to a category, a type, something less than human. Call Murphy now, Viper demanded, shaking her slightly. I don't care if he's in a meeting, at dinner, or asleep. You call him right now and you make him answer. Or I'm going to start breaking things. He paused. Starting with you, Elena's phone was in her apron pocket. Viper's hand was still twisted in her shirt. His breath smelled like beer and cigarettes. His eyes promised violence. I told you, he's not answering, Elena said. Then we have a problem, Viper replied. His other hand came up, fingers spreading across the collar of her white shirt. Elena felt the fabric tighten against her throat, felt him gathering it in his fist, preparing to do something. Last chance, he said. Elena looked past him at the faces watching. Some were afraid, some were ashamed. Some were angry but paralyzed. This was how it always worked. Evil succeeded because good people convinced themselves they were powerless. No, Elena said simply. The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Viper's face twisted with rage. His fingers tightened on her shirt. And then he pulled, hard and violent. The sound of tearing fabric ripped through the silence. Elena's white shirt split from collar to chest. The buttons scattered across the floor like dropped coins. Bouncing and rolling, the torn shirt hung open, revealing the black tank top underneath. And there, across her shoulder and upper back, visible to everyone in the room now, was ink. Dark lines etched into dark skin. An eagle, fierce and proud, wings spread wide. A globe beneath it, an anchor, solid and unmovable. The eagle, globe, and anchor, the emblem of the United States Marine Corps. And beneath it, in bold letters, First Force Recon. The entire bar froze. Viper's hand still gripped the torn fabric, but his face had gone blank. His eyes fixed on the tattoo, trying to process what he was seeing. Around the tattoo were scars, some round and puckered from bullets, some jagged from shrapnel, some long and straight from blades. They weren't decorative. They were a map of battles fought and survived. Elena's posture changed, her shoulders squared, her spine straightened, her chin lifted. The waitress disappeared. In her place stood something else. Someone else, a warrior. The storm had finally broken. Time seemed to stop inside Murphy's Roadhouse. The jukebox was silent. The refrigerator's hum faded into background noise. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. Every eye in the bar locked onto Elena's exposed shoulder and back, onto the tattoo that changed everything. The eagle, globe, and anchor wasn't just ink on skin. It was a symbol that carried weight, history, sacrifice. It meant Elena Morales wasn't just a waitress who served beers and wiped tables. She was a United States Marine, and not just any Marine. The words First Force Recon identified her as part of an elite unit. The tip of the spear, the ones who went in first when everyone else stayed behind. Viper's hand still clutched the torn white shirt. But his grip had gone slack. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. His brain was trying to catch up with what his eyes were telling him. The confidence that had filled him moments ago drained away like water through cupped hands. Crusher, the biker who had grabbed Elena's wrist, took an involuntary step backward. His face had gone pale beneath his beard. He knew what Force Recon meant. Most people who had served in any branch of military knew. These were the Marines who conducted deep reconnaissance behind enemy lines, who extracted hostages from impossible situations, who trained to survive and fight in the worst conditions imaginable. Spiderweb, standing by the jukebox, whispered something that sounded like a curse. His spider tattoo seemed to crawl across his face as his expression shifted from arrogance to uncertainty. But it wasn't just the tattoo that held the room captive. It was the scars. They told stories that words couldn't capture. A round scar near her left shoulder blade, about the size of a dime, that could only be a bullet's exit wound. Jagged white lines across her ribs where shrapnel had torn through flesh. A long, thin scar that disappeared beneath her tank top. Clearly from a blade, these weren't accidents or mishaps. They were combat wounds, proof written in tissue and nerve that Elena had been to war and come back. Elena didn't move, didn't speak. She simply stood there letting them see, letting the truth of who she was settle over the room like snow. Her breathing was steady, her posture had transformed completely. Gone was the slight hunch of a service worker trying to be unobtrusive. In its place was the bearing of someone who had commanded under fire, who had made life and death decisions before most people finished their morning coffee. From a corner booth that had seemed empty, a figure stood up. An older man with silver hair, cropped military short, wearing jeans and a plain button-down shirt. His ice blue eyes were sharp and calculating. assessing. He walked forward slowly, his stride purposeful, and when he spoke, his voice carried the unmistakable tone of command. "Gunnery Sergeant Morales," the man said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. Elena's body responded before her mind could stop it. Her shoulders pulled back another fraction of an inch. Her chin came up, her hands moved to her sides. Not quite standing at attention, but close. "Muscle memory from thousands of hours of training, sir," she replied, the single word carrying acknowledgement and respect. The silver-haired man stopped a few feet away. His eyes scanned the tattoo. The scars, Elena's face. Colonel Mike Harrison. "Retired," he introduced himself. "I was at Fallujah in 2004. I remember the reports." His voice softened slightly. "I remember your name in those reports." Something flickered across Elena's face. Pain or memory or both. Her lips pressed together briefly before she responded. "Reporting, sir." The words came automatically. Years of protocol embedded so deep, they surfaced without thought. Fallujah. The name alone carried weight, one of the bloodiest battles of the Iraq War. House-to-house fighting through a city that had become a fortress of insurgents. The kind of combat that tested every soldier to their absolute limit. Jake, still standing behind the bar with his phone recording everything, felt his understanding of reality shift. The quiet woman who had worked beside him for 6 months, who had patiently shown him how to balance the register and deal with difficult customers, who had never raised her voice or caused any trouble, had been there, had fought there, had survived there. Maria Santos, the flower shop owner, stood up slowly from her table. Her hand went to her mouth. Her eyes were wide with recognition. "Camp Leatherneck," she said, her voice trembling. "I was a Navy corpsman. I was in pre-op when they brought you in." She took a hesitant step forward. 60% burns, 3 bullet wounds, shrapnel wounds across your back and legs. Tears formed in her eyes. "They said you carried 38 children out of a school that was on fire and under attack." The room absorbed this information like a sponge soaking up water. 38 children, a burning building, enemy fire. The details were almost too large to comprehend. Elena's jaw tightened. Her eyes fixed on a point somewhere above everyone's heads. 37 made it onto the manifest, she said quietly. The 38th was born on the helicopter during evacuation. Her mother named her Elena. Silence crashed over the room like a wave. This wasn't just a veteran. This wasn't just someone who had served their time and come home. This was a genuine hero, someone who had sacrificed everything, who bore the scars, both visible and invisible. Viper finally released the torn shirt, letting it fall. He took a step back, his face a mixture of confusion, anger, and something that might have been fear. His whole world had just been flipped upside down. The easy target, the woman he could intimidate and control, had turned out to be someone who had faced down actual enemies with actual weapons in actual combat. "You," Viper started, his voice uncertain for the first time. "You should have said something." Elena's eyes dropped from the distant point and focused directly on him. When she spoke, her voice had changed completely. No longer the soft, accommodating tone of a service worker. Now it was the voice of someone who had given orders under fire and expected them to be followed. "Mr. Jackson," she said, using his real name, watching his face register surprise that she knew it. "You just destroyed my property." She gestured at the torn shirt on the floor. "You owe me an apology." The simple statement carried the weight of authority. Not a request, not a plea, a command. Viper's mouth worked soundlessly. Around him, his crew had gone still, uncertain. Their whole plan, their intimidation tactics, their violence-backed extortion, all of it had been predicated on the assumption that Elena was powerless, that she would fold, that she had no choice but to submit. But Force Recon didn't submit. Force Recon adapted, overcame, survived. From his corner, Sheriff Tom Bradley stood up again. But this time his posture was different. He wasn't trying to intervene as a lone officer facing impossible odds. He was standing with someone, standing behind someone who had already proven they could handle themselves. Colonel Harrison crossed his arms, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. 7 years since I retired, he said conversationally, and I still remember the lesson they taught us at Officer Candidate School. Never underestimate your opponent, never assume weakness. Always gather intelligence before engagement. He looked at Viper directly. You failed all 3, son. The construction workers at Table 3, Frank and Bobby, exchanged glances. Something was shifting in their expressions. The fear was still there, but it was being joined by something else. Anger at themselves for having looked away. for having stayed silent while a fellow veteran was harassed, the old couple near the window, who had been frozen with terror minutes ago, now sat up straighter. The old man's hand moved to his own collar, where a small pin was barely visible. A Vietnam veteran's insignia. He had served too, decades ago, and he recognized what he was seeing. Viper's crew looked to him for direction, waiting for orders, but their leader, the man who had walked in radiating confidence and control, now stood uncertain. His snake tattoo seemed less threatening now, just ink trying to imitate danger, while real danger stood in front of him in a torn shirt and black tank top. Elena took one step forward, not aggressive, just closing distance. "I believe you owe me an apology," she repeated, her voice steady as stone. "For touching me without permission, for tearing my shirt, for your threats, and for every racist comment you and your crew have made tonight." The words hung in the air, clear and undeniable. The whole bar waited to see what would happen next. The waitress was gone, the Marine remained. Viper stood frozen, his brain struggling to process the complete reversal of power in the room. 30 seconds ago, he had been in control, the alpha predator. Now he felt like a coyote that had cornered what it thought was a rabbit, only to discover it had trapped a wolf instead. Elena didn't repeat her demand a third time. She simply waited, standing perfectly still with the patience of someone who had spent hours lying motionless in hostile territory. Watching and waiting for the right moment, time was on her side now. Every second that passed without Viper responding made him look weaker in front of his crew, made his authority crumble like dried clay. Colonel Harrison moved slowly to Elena's right, not crowding her but positioning himself as backup. His military bearing was unmistakable now. The way he held his weight, the economy of movement. Other veterans in the room recognized it immediately. It was a language spoken without words. "Stephen Marcus Jackson," Elena said suddenly, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife through silk. She recited his full name as if reading from a file. "Dishonorably discharged from the Army 6 years ago for stealing and selling military equipment. Founded the Desert Vipers 3 years ago after your previous motorcycle club kicked you out for excessive violence." She paused, letting each fact land. "Currently wanted in connection with 4 arson investigations and 2 aggravated assault cases across 3 counties." Viper's face went from pale to red. "How do you— Force Recon doesn't walk into situations blind," Elena interrupted. "The moment I heard your motorcycles, I knew who you were. I ran your name, your crew, your patterns," she gestured around the room. "I know that Crusher there, real name Robert Dale Finch, has 2 prior convictions for battery. I know Spider's real name is Tommy Chen and he's on parole for armed robbery. Should I continue?" The message was clear. She had done reconnaissance. She had intelligence. She had been 3 steps ahead the entire time while they thought they were hunting her. Spiderweb's face tightened with anger, but also with fear. Parole violations meant going back to prison. He hadn't signed up for that, just easy money from scared bar owners. Frank, one of the construction workers, suddenly stood up from table 3. His work boots made solid sounds against the wooden floor as he walked toward Elena. He stopped a few feet away and pulled up his sleeve, revealing a faded tattoo on his forearm. 3 chevrons, a Marine Corps rank insignia. "Sergeant Frank Morrison," he said, his voice rough with shame. "I sat there and watched them disrespect you." He looked at Viper with pure disgust. "I'm standing now." Bobby, his co-worker, rose as well. He didn't have military tattoos, but he spoke anyway. "I'm nobody special," he said. "Just a guy who pours concrete for a living. But I'm standing too." The old man near the window stood slowly, his joints creaking. "Vietnam, 1968, he said simply, pulling back his collar to show his veteran pin more clearly. "We don't abandon our own." His wife stood beside him, all 5 feet of her straightening with surprising dignity. "And we don't tolerate bullies," she added. Her voice steady despite her age, Maria Santos walked over from her table. Stopping next to Colonel Harrison, "Navy corpsman," she said. "I took an oath to defend the wounded." Her eyes met Elena's. That oath didn't expire. One by one, people in the bar were making a choice. The choice they should have made earlier. But fear had frozen them. Now with Elena's truth exposed, with her courage visible, they found their own. Jake came out from behind the bar, still holding his phone. "I'm not military," he said, "but I'm done being scared." He looked at Viper. "You don't own this place, you don't own us." Viper looked around. Seeing his tactical advantage dissolving, the exits were still blocked by his men, but now the room felt different. Less like trapped prey and more like a powder keg. His crew was shifting uncomfortably. sensing the change in atmosphere. "This is ridiculous," Viper tried to reassert control. "You're all going to stand up for her?" He pointed at Elena. "Over what? A torn shirt? Some hurt feelings?" Over basic human deck, Elena's command hung in the air like a challenge written in steel. The room had transformed completely from a place of fear into something else. Something powerful. Ordinary people who had been paralyzed by intimidation now stood together, creating a human wall of solidarity that the Desert Vipers hadn't anticipated. Viper looked around frantically, his tactical advantage crumbling. His crew still blocked the exits, but blocking doors meant nothing when you had lost control of the narrative. When the prey had revealed themselves to be predators, "This is insane," Viper spat, trying to salvage his authority. "You're all going to regret this, every single one of you." His voice rose with desperation. "We know where you live, where you work, where your families, threatening witnesses in front of a law enforcement officer." Sheriff Tom interrupted, holding up his phone. "That's another felony to add to the list." His screen showed a recording in progress, timestamp visible. "Keep talking." "Jackson, you're building your own case." Colonel Harrison stepped forward, his voice calm but carrying decades of command experience. "Son, you have two options here," he said to Viper. "Option 1, you leave now. You never come back. You end this protection racket permanently. And maybe, just maybe, Miss Morales decides not to press charges." He paused, letting that sink in. "Option 2, you escalate, things get violent. And I guarantee you that 7 against this room won't end the way you think it will." The colonel wasn't bluffing. Besides Frank the Marine and the Vietnam veteran, 3 other men had quietly positioned themselves near the bikers. Their movements had been subtle, but Elena noticed one man had a tattoo partially visible under his sleeve. Army airborne wings, another wore a faded cap with a Navy anchor. The third had the weathered look of someone who had seen combat. Even without visible military markings, Crusher shifted his weight nervously. "Viper! Man, this wasn't supposed to go like this," he muttered. "We should just shut up." Viper snapped at him, but his voice lacked conviction. His eyes darted from face to face, calculating odds that kept getting worse. The phones recording him, the witnesses, the veterans, the sheriff with legal authority, Elena herself with combat training that exceeded anything his street gang could match. Elena took one step forward, closing the distance between herself and Viper. She moved with fluid precision, balanced on the balls of her feet, hands loose at her sides, not aggressive but ready. Viper instinctively took a step back, his body responding to threat before his brain could override it. "Mr. Jackson," Elena said, her voice dropping to a tone that was somehow more intimidating than shouting, "I've faced insurgents armed with RPGs and automatic weapons. I've survived IED explosions that turned vehicles into shrapnel. I've been shot, burned, and left for dead." She paused, her eyes locked on his. "Do you honestly believe that you and your motorcycle gang frighten me?" The question wasn't rhetorical, it was an assessment. Forcing Viper to confront reality, he was a bully who relied on intimidation, on victims being too scared to fight back. Elena wasn't scared. She had proven that in the most hostile environments on Earth. Maria Santos spoke up from beside Colonel Harrison. "I stitched her wounds in a field hospital while mortars fell around us," she said, her voice shaking slightly but determined. "She never screamed, never begged, never broke." Maria's eyes met Viper's. "You tore her shirt and thought you humiliated her. All you did was show everyone who she really is." Jake raised his phone higher, making sure the camera captured everything. "I've got clear footage of the assault, the threats, the racial slurs," he announced. "It's already backed up to cloud storage. Deleting it from my phone won't help." Viper's face had gone from red to an unhealthy gray color. He was trapped, truly trapped for the first time, not by physical barriers but by consequences, by witnesses, by evidence, by the law. Sheriff Tom stood up fully, his hand resting on his belt where his badge would normally sit. "Stephen Jackson, I'm placing you under citizen's arrest for assault, destruction of property, extortion, and making terroristic threats," he said formally. "You have the right to remain silent." "You're off duty," Viper protested weakly, grasping at technical straws. "You said you have no authority." "I'm a citizen," Tom replied calmly. "Every citizen has the right to arrest someone committing a felony in their presence. My being a sheriff just means I know the proper procedure." He pulled out his phone. "Dialing, dispatch, this is Sheriff Bradley. I need backup at Murphy's Roadhouse. Multiple suspects in custody, assault, and extortion. Elena raised her hand slightly, stopping the sheriff mid-call. "Wait," she said. Her eyes never left Viper's face. She was thinking, calculating. Weighing options the way she had been trained to do in complex tactical situations, the room held its breath, wondering what she would decide. "Mr. Jackson," Elena said slowly, "I'm going to give you one chance. One opportunity to walk out of here without handcuffs, without charges, without your name in tomorrow's newspaper." She crossed her arms. "But there are conditions." Viper's eyes widened slightly, hope flickering for the first time. "First," Elena continued, "you will kneel right here, right now, and you will apologize not to me alone, but to everyone in this room. For your threats, for your violence, for your racist comments." She held up a finger. "Second, you and your entire crew will leave this bar and never return. Not to Murphy's, not to any business in this county. Third," Colonel Harrison added, picking up the thread, "you will end your protection racket. All of it will be watching, and if we hear about one more bar being threatened, one more business being extorted, the evidence from tonight goes straight to the district attorney. Fourth," Sheriff Tom said, "you'll submit to being photographed and documented. Names, faces, bike plates, everything on record. Insurance policy," Viper's jaw clenched. His pride warred with his survival instinct. Kneeling meant submission, meant admitting defeat in front of his crew. But refusing meant jail, criminal charges. "His gang falling apart, Neil," Elena repeated. The command cutting through his internal debate. "Or go to jail, choose now." The seconds stretched out. Each one feeling like an hour, Viper looked at his crew, seeing uncertainty in their faces. They were bikers, criminals perhaps, but they weren't soldiers. They hadn't signed up for real consequences. Slowly, reluctantly, like a tree bending in a storm, Viper's knees bent. He lowered himself to the floor, the wooden boards creaking under his weight. His crew watched in stunned silence, their leader humbled before their eyes. "Say it," Elena ordered, standing above him. "Loud enough for everyone to hear?" Viper's voice came out rough, forced through clenched teeth. "I apologize," he started, then stopped. "Louder," Colonel Harrison commanded, "and be specific." Viper drew a shaky breath. "I apologize for assaulting you, for tearing your shirt, for threatening this bar and everyone here." His face burned with shame. "I apologize for my racist words and behavior." The words tasted like poison in his mouth. "We won't come back. We're leaving now." The room absorbed his apology. Some faces showed satisfaction. Others showed pity. Elena showed nothing, just calm assessment. "Stand up," she said finally. "Leave." "All of you," Viper rose slowly, his gang gathering around him uncertainly. They moved toward the door, but Frank the Marine stepped forward. "Blocking their path briefly, back out," Frank said quietly. "Don't turn your backs on the lady, show some respect." The Desert Vipers backed toward the exit, maintaining eye contact, their swagger completely gone. When they reached the door, Viper turned and pushed through, his crew following. The sound of motorcycle engines starting filled the night, then fading, growing quieter, disappearing into the distance like a bad dream ending. Inside Murphy's Roadhouse, nobody moved for a long moment. Then slowly, someone started clapping. Maria Santos, others joined, applause building. Not loud or celebratory, but respectful, acknowledging what had just happened. Elena picked up her torn shirt from the floor, folding it carefully. "Jake," she said calmly, "can you call Murphy? Tell him what happened. Tell him we need to install security cameras, just like that." She was back to practical matters, back to solving problems. The warrior had delivered justice. Now the waitress returned to work. The sound of motorcycle engines had faded into the desert night, leaving only silence and the soft hum of Murphy's Roadhouse settling back into normalcy. But nothing about the bar felt normal anymore. Something fundamental had shifted, like tectonic plates moving beneath the surface, creating new ground where old fears had stood. Elena walked behind the bar and pulled out a spare shirt from her locker. A simple gray t-shirt that she kept for emergencies. She slipped it on over her tank top, covering the tattoo and scars that had changed everything. But even hidden, everyone in the room knew they were there. The secret was out. The quiet waitress who never complained and always smiled politely had revealed herself to be a warrior. Jake stood beside her, still holding his phone, his hands trembling slightly from the adrenaline dump. "That was," he started, then stopped, searching for words. "That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen." "It was necessary," Elena replied simply. pulling her hair back into a fresh ponytail. Sometimes bullies need to be confronted. Sometimes running away just means they'll hurt someone else tomorrow. Sheriff Tom Bradley approached the bar, his face serious but with a hint of respect in his eyes. "Miss Morales, I need to file a formal report," he said. Even though they left, assault charges can still be pressed. The video evidence is solid, Elena considered this, her fingers drumming lightly on the counter, a habit from her military days when making tactical decisions.
"How many other businesses has Viper's gang hit?"
She asked. "At least 6 that we know of," Tom replied. 3 paid the protection money out of fear. 2 refused and had mysterious fires within a week. 1 owner is still in the hospital from the beating they gave him. The numbers settled over Elena like a heavy coat. 6 businesses, dozens of lives disrupted. Families terrorized, dreams destroyed by men who used fear as currency. She had stopped them tonight, but would it last? Would they return when anger replaced humiliation? Would they target other places in revenge? "We need more than charges," Elena said slowly. Thinking out loud, "We need to make this place safe. Permanently." She looked around the room at the faces still watching her. "We need to build something," Colonel Harrison, who had been speaking quietly with Frank and the other veterans, walked over. "Gunnery Sergeant," he said, then corrected himself with a small smile. "Elena, what did you have in mind?" Elena's mind was already working through the problem like a mission brief. Identify the objective, assess resources, create a sustainable solution. "First, security cameras," she said, counting on her fingers. "Front door, back door. Parking lot, bar area, full coverage with cloud backup so footage can't be destroyed." "I can handle that," Jake said immediately. "My brother installs security systems. He'll give us a good price." "Second," Elena continued, "a community watch, not vigilantes, just people who look out for each other. Veterans, residents, business owners, all connected." She gestured around the room. "Everyone here tonight saw what happened when ordinary people stood together. We need to keep that going," Maria Santos nodded enthusiastically. "I'll coordinate with the other shop owners on this street," she offered. "We can set up a phone tree. If one business has trouble, we all respond. Peacefully but firmly." "Third," Elena said, her voice taking on the tone of command that came naturally when planning operations. "Education. Most people freeze during confrontations because they don't know what to do. We can change that." She looked at Sheriff Tom. "Could you run a workshop? Teach people basic de-escalation, how to document incidents, when to call police, how to be effective witnesses." Tom's face lit up with understanding. "Bystander intervention training," he said. "The 5 Ds, distract, delegate, document, delay, direct." He pulled out a small notebook. "I can set something up for next Thursday evening. Right here if Murphy agrees." "He'll agree," Elena said with certainty. "Because if he doesn't, I'll find another bar that will." Frank, the marine construction worker, stepped forward with his co-worker Bobby. "We'll build something too," Frank said. "A memorial wall for local veterans." His voice grew thick with emotion. "So many of us come back and try to blend in, try to forget. But tonight proved we're stronger when we remember who we are. When we stand together," the old Vietnam veteran shuffled forward, leaning on his wife for support. "I've got photos," he said quietly. "My unit, guys who didn't make it home, I'd be honored to start that wall." Elena felt something warm spreading through her chest. Something she hadn't felt in the 6 months since she'd arrived in this small desert town. Purpose, community, belonging. She had spent half a year trying to hide, trying to be invisible, trying to leave the warrior behind and become someone ordinary. But tonight had taught her that ordinary people could be warriors too. "In different ways. We'll need a policy," Elena said, pulling out the notepad she'd used earlier. This time she actually wrote down what she was thinking. A clear statement that this bar, and eventually all the businesses who join us, have 0 tolerance for hate, discrimination, extortion, or violence. "A safe space declaration," Maria suggested. "Not political, just human. Everyone deserves to feel safe where they work and socialize." Jake grabbed a chalkboard from the back room, one they usually used for daily specials. He wiped it clean and handed Elena a piece of white chalk. She stood in front of it, thinking carefully about the words, then wrote in clear, bold letters, 0 tolerance for hate or respect in word and deed beneath that. She added, "Murphy's Roadhouse is a safe space for all people veterans welcome. Discrimination not welcome, we stand together." The words looked simple on the board, almost too simple. But Elena knew that the most powerful declarations were often the plainest. No fancy language needed, just truth stated clearly. Colonel Harrison read the board and nodded approvingly. That's good, he said. Direct, unambiguous, enforceable. He turned to Elena. You know what you've started here tonight, don't you? This isn't just about one bar or one gang. This is about changing how a community responds to threats. Elena set down the chalk and looked around the room. At Jake, young and inspired, already planning how to improve security. At Maria, organizing shop owners into a network of mutual protection. At Frank and Bobby, sketching ideas for the memorial wall. At Sheriff Tom, drafting curriculum for the workshop. At the old Vietnam veteran and his wife, sorting through photos of soldiers long gone.